fellow citizens, and welcome to the second and final installment of the Nuclear Capacity, a mini-series podcast sharing the benefits of a pro-nuclear future. My name's Ethan Sundin, and I'm a senior at Wayzata High School. For the past few months, I've been researching the costs and benefits of nuclear energy, which has long remained the United States' most controversial energy source. In the first episode of the Nuclear Capacity, we talked about the social and economic benefits and why they outweigh the negative externalities. In this episode, we'll explore nuclear energy legislation and we'll talk to two special guests on each side of the political spectrum for their opinions. The piece of legislature that I'm supporting is Bill S-4897, also known as the American Nuclear Infrastructure Act. The purpose of this bill is, quote, to reestablish United States global leadership in nuclear energy, revitalize domestic nuclear energy supply chain infrastructure, support the licensing of advanced nuclear technologies, and improve the regulation of nuclear energy, and for other purposes. End quote. With the recent shift in power in the federal government, with Democrats winning the presidency, Senate, and keeping the House, we could see some serious action being taken against climate change, including the revision of nuclear energy. We've already covered why nuclear energy is the best course of action, so let's talk to some people about what they think of it. The first guest is a local high school student and friend of mine. Let's introduce him. All right, we've got our first guest here. His name is Andrew, and he's a good friend of mine. Do you want to introduce yourself, say your age and your political affiliation?
Yeah, I'm Andrew. I go to high school with Ethan, and I'm 18. And I would say I'm not really affiliated with any parties specifically, but I definitely lean right when it comes to politics.
So my first question is just a basic one. How do you feel about climate change?
I think climate change is a really big issue that's definitely been getting more into the limelight recently and been getting a lot of attention. As you see, like the Time Person of the Year a couple of years ago had
Greta
having a really
Thunberg?
having a really big stance in it. And a lot of stuff with the new changing of the presidents, a lot of expected climate change laws or orders to go into place to really change how the United States does it. And I think a lot of that's going to be really positive. I think a lot of action needs to be taken now before it's too late.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. It's also, I've noticed, a really popular uh, trend, I want to say, for younger people to support actions to battle climate change more than any other group of people. Then, kind of branching off of that, how familiar would you say you are when it comes to the nuclear energy debate?
Um, I've got my toes in a lot of different waters when it comes to some of the big political issues. But I'm certainly no expert and I haven't done an extensive amount of research, but I think I could have a decent conversation if someone were to want to do that.
Okay, and then do you have an opinion on what the federal government should do when it comes to nuclear policy? And do you think investing in nuclear energy is something the United States should do?
I personally am a little mixed because I know there is a large not a large risk, but if something does go wrong, it can have a large effect. And if something to like some sort of terrorism event were to happen related to a nuclear power plant, that could cause a lot of damage, a lot of widespread damage. But I also think it's a very fairly efficient method of green energy, and compared to a lot of methods, it generates a lot of energy. So I think all in all, the increasing of our use of nuclear energy would be a positive thing. We just have to make sure we regulate it and protect it correctly, so that we don't see any of the negative effects that you've seen in other countries, like in Russia.
Yeah, with the Chernobyl incident, which just got a lot of more attention, 50 years later, after HBO's miniseries. Yeah, the negative externalities are something a lot of people worry about, whether it be like meltdowns or terrorist attacks, like you mentioned. Those are definitely risks when it comes to nuclear. So, for around the last 3 decades, there's been relatively no new steps towards more nuclear power in the US, although other countries have started investing in it further, especially France, where about half of their energy generated per year is from nuclear alone. And so after 3 decades of relatively no action towards more nuclear energy, how likely do you think a comeback is for nuclear energy in the near future?
I think recently a lot of people have been focused on what is now seen as the more popular methods of like solar and wind powered green energy, which are both great. Solar especially is great on a small scale. A house can easily be powered by solar energy, but I think to really get our country going in the right direction environmentally, we need to see the comeback of nuclear energy because it has the ability to create so much more power and it's so much more efficient compared to where we're at technologically with the other powers of energy. So I think there's a depending on how scientists and politicians lean, I think there's a good chance that it comes back, knowing that the new administration has a lot of things that they want to do in reducing our environmental footprint. So I think that that's one thing that they may look into just because of the efficiency of it compared to other methods.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out about other types of green energy like solar and wind power is that they're incredibly weather dependent.
Hmm.
And so if if the exact weather conditions aren't met, they can't make they can't make the most efficient energy 100% of the time. So one good thing about nuclear is that it can be generating electricity 24/7, except after 4 to 6 years when the fuel needs to be swapped out.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think solar energy is great on a household basis, where there it's very easy to store the amount of energy needed and have it in reserve if you were to run into a couple overcast days. But I think on the commercial and the larger scale level of powering a city, nuclear is so much more efficient that it really has to be the direction we go if we want to see any large changes to our economic footprint in the next few years.
Then my last question, would you support the America Nuclear Infrastructure Act of 2020 proposed by a Republican senator and is co-sponsored by both Democrats and Republicans? This would invest in advanced nuclear reactors, which would be safer and more efficient. The bill would also, among other things, improve nuclear energy regulations. Would you support that?
I would definitely support that. Yeah, I think if we can get legislation going that supports new research and new developments in nuclear energy, I think it would help ease the minds of a lot of those people that see nuclear energy as a dangerous thing or see the negative stigma that you can see from like nuclear weapons and stemming from the issues that we have with North Korea and all the way back to the Cold War. And if people see that scientists are working on developing safer ways and they're putting a lot of funding into it, I think that that would be a very positive change that the nation could take.
All right, that's all I have for you. You've been a great guest on the show, but I'm going to let you go now.
All right, thank you for having me.
All right, now we'll move on to our next guest. All right, now joining me is a good friend of mine from high school. His name is Zach.
Hello.
Could you share your name, age, and political affiliation?
Hi, my name is Zach. I am currently 18, and I used to think that I was more moderate, but I've slowly started to migrate into more left-sided issues.
So my first question for you is, how do you feel about climate change? Like, how much do you care about climate change?
One of the biggest problems of our time, mostly because nobody is doing anything about it. We have less than 12 years to do something before a major climate collapse begins via tipping point that we even slowly don't really understand yet because we're not getting enough funding. And even if we were, there's the governments around the world, and especially the governments in America, aren't doing enough to even take the idea seriously at all, much less do the proper responses and infrastructure changes in order to combat the not even slow, just the rapidly approaching death of our planet.
Yeah, going back to your 12 years point, I think that was also an argument used in the 1970s, I want to say, when Nixon was proposing the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts. There's a lot of talk then going on about how there's a little time to act, and it's, 50 years later, and we've still done not a lot of things. So I totally agree with you. I think it's the biggest crisis of our time. All right, next question. How familiar are you when it comes to the nuclear energy debate?
I think that I am more familiar than than any random Joe, but still probably not enough to be included on any sort of, truly scientific debate.
How did you, so you say you're familiar. How did you come across the information that educated you in the topic of nuclear energy?
Multiple documentaries that I've seen throughout my life. I am a self-proclaimed natural pursuer of knowledge. So I've done a lot of independent research on many subjects, nuclear energy being one of them. Several of the entertainers that I watch on the internet are very educated on the subject, and I've just taken an interest to it.
Do you think investing in nuclear energy on like a federal level is a good idea?
Yes,
Why?
because I think it's one of the only solutions that we can come up with to combat climate change reliably and I guess cost effectively. If we had the option, solar farms and wind farms would be, I think, the best, but those are somewhat unreliable and they're also quite expensive. I suppose nuclear energy is also quite
Yeah,
expensive.
actually, a point I want to make, nuclear energy is actually known to be the most, or pretty much the most expensive form of energy. It will cost anywhere from 8 billion to 20 billion dollars to make a nuclear facility, which takes like 10 to 20 years to make, to actually construct it. And then it starts producing energy for the cities around it. And so that's actually one drawback that nuclear energy has is the immense startup cost.
And of course, the fissile material it takes to run it is not the easiest to mine nor the most cheap to mine. However, nuclear energy, this is how I'm going to put this. Nuclear energy, when understood and respected and carefully executed, is a perfect uh, and very efficient energy source. When done incorrectly or done haphazardly, it creates dangerous waste and the potential for extreme and devastating disasters, as we have seen with, say, the Fukushima reactor over meltdown and, of course, the infamous Chernobyl explosion.
Yeah, one thing I want to quickly mention with the nuclear waste, it is very dangerous, although the main reason why the nuclear industry has been given such a bad rep for nuclear waste is from like poor media portrayal, like in
Absolutely.
The Simpsons, and also just like media bias in the last 50 years. The actual danger of nuclear waste and exposure to it is pretty much non-existent because the all of the high risk or high danger nuclear waste is stored in, like the metal bins, and most of it is stored on site underground in cement chambers, or they're transported to other storage sites. Although the actual like risk factor is a lot lower than the average person would first think. So after nearly 3 decades of pretty much no action, how likely do you think it is that there's going to be a nuclear comeback in the near future?
Well, with the current time that we were recording this after a new president has just been uh, sworn into office, I believe that it is more likely than it would have been before, though I'm not holding my breath.
All right, and that leads me to my final question. Would you support the American Nuclear Infrastructure Act of 2020? It wants to invest in advanced nuclear technologies and also improve nuclear energy regulations, among other things. Would you support it?
Yes, 100%.
One thing going back to how likely I personally think it is that we're going to see more nuclear energy policies and new nuclear energy development. I think it's very likely, especially like what you said with the new Biden administration coming in. They've said straight up that they're going to be wanting to invest in more nuclear energy. And also, the American Nuclear Infrastructure Act was actually proposed by a Republican, and it was co-sponsored by both Democrats and Republicans. So it's shown that it has bipartisan support in Congress, and the executive office uh, has interest in expanding it. So I think it could really take a huge comeback, and I think it's a key component for combating the climate crisis. Do you have any closing remarks?
Don't believe everything you read on Facebook.
All right, Zach, you've been a pleasure having on the show. I appreciated your informed opinions.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here.
I want to thank everyone listening right now for coming along this journey with me. And although our journey was short, I hope you learned something new, and I hope you see why nuclear energy is an important thing to invest in through government legislation. Anyway, that concludes the second and final installment of the Nuclear Capacity. If you liked what you heard or you want to see my sources, you can find a link to my full paper in the description. This podcast was researched, written, and edited by myself, and the logo was designed by myself using the tools at designevo.com. The intro and outro music are original compositions. Thank you, and farewell, citizens.